Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Hannah Yu, Curator of Public Programs at the Fowler Museum at UCLA. The Fowler is pleased to present today's Lunch and Learn program, where Erica P. Jones, Senior Curator of African Arts and Manager of Curatorial Affairs, will discuss about Yoruba Leadership Arts and Architecture collection on display in the Fowler's permanent exhibition, Intersections, World Arts, Local Lives, focusing on how the works of the 19th and 20th century artists reveal the changing structures of colonial-era politics. Erica P. Jones's curatorial work has engaged such themes as the legacy of colonialism in Africa, historical royal arts, and resonances between Africa and its diasporas. Exhibitions she has curated or co-curated include The House Was Too Small, Yoruba Sacred Arts from Africa and Beyond in 2023, Inheritance, Recent Video Art from Africa in 2019, on display in the Walled City, the Nigerian Pavilion at the British Empire Exhibition from 1924 to 1925 in 2019, and Meleko Mokgosi, Bread, Butter, and Power in 2018. Jones is on the board of African Arts Journal, serves as a co-chair of the steering committee for the Collaboration, Collections, and Restitution Best Practices Working Group, and in 2024 led the Fowler Museum's repatriation of 7 looted objects to the Asante Kingdom in Ghana. Her publishing has been concentrated on colonial-era collecting, provenance, and the arts and museums of the Cameroon grassfields. Jones holds a PhD and an MA in art history from UCLA and a BA in art history and anthropology from the University of Pennsylvania. If you have any questions during the program, please submit them through the question and answer function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit and upvote entries that you would like to be considered to be answered by the curator during the program. And now over to you, Erica.
Thank you so much, Hannah. It's funny, as you read the description of the talk, we had come up with this like a while ago, and then I started working on it, and we're gonna do some things that were connected to that, but I'm gonna go off script a little bit. We're gonna stay within Nigerian architecture. So let's leave it at that. Let me pull up my PowerPoint. Thank you to everyone who's joining us today. Okay. So, as I was saying, my talk today is largely inspired by our installation of Yoruba Leadership Architectural Arts in our permanent collections gallery here at the Fowler. And if you haven't seen those pieces in person, and if you're local, I do suggest you come by for a visit because they are really exceptional pieces. And actually, here's a little sneak peek of the corner. So, just as a quick background to the arts in this section, in the pre-colonial period, Yoruba communities of southwestern Nigeria and the neighboring Republic of Benin viewed their kings, also known as Obas, as the center of political, religious, and cultural life. These Obas were living symbols of divinity. They had sacred authority within their kingdoms, really incredibly powerful figures. Commensurate with the Oba's status was the reverence accorded to the palace, which was also known as the Afin, which was considered as sacred, if not more so than many temples devoted to Yoruba deities. So the metaphorical centrality of the Oba was mirrored in the physical centrality of the palace, which was always situated in the heart of a town. Major roads would all converge on the large open market square in front of the Afin, and most powerful historical Obas would have had these walled palaces that contained extensive grounds that had these rambling building complexes. They even included sometimes forested areas for hunting. And inside the walls of the palace were vast courtyards. And these served as town assembly halls, law courts, sports grounds, any number of things. And as you moved further inside the palace complex, there were more courtyards of varying sizes that contained living quarters and shrines. And as both palace and temple, the Afin was decorated intricately with carved doors and veranda posts like the ones you see here, that not only asserted the supremacy of the Oba with their fine carving, but also conveyed narratives emphasizing his political power, the royal lineage, military prowess, and the essential ritual role, all of these things that sustain the life of the kingdom. So that's a little bit of a background to this section in our permanent collection gallery. What I want to do today is kind of look at three case studies, if you will, that think through where we see sort of traces, the impact, markers of the colonial period in these Nigerian architectural elements. And so I want to start by thinking about how the colonial era had this impact on historical markers of power in Yoruba architectural elements. So as we see here, we have a veranda post by the great carver Agbombiofe Adeshina. And in this, you'll notice the form of a horse and rider. So the warrior equestrian was a really popular motif in Yoruba royal arts. Horses first became integral elements of Yoruba warfare in the 17th century when the Kingdom of Oyo created a cavalry that allowed for the dramatic extension and control of its empire. So it was very, an incredibly profound impact to have a cavalry. The distinct advantage horses provided in warfare resulted in their longstanding position in Yoruba royal iconography as symbols of male dominance. And so you see here the male warrior rider. These equestrian figures were not only associated with military conquest, but that meaning sort of grew even larger and was connected to martial and spiritual protection of the kingdom. So consequently, veranda posts often depicted horses surmounted by powerful men such as obas, warriors, or hunters. The might of the warrior equestrian depicted in this post is accentuated by he carries all of these weapons. He has a knife, he has a gun in his on the other side, because you can see the knife in his hand in this image. And these are basically drawing on traditional and imported means of protection. There we go. So if the horse and rider is an indication of power, we have the Agbombiofe post we just looked at is our earliest example in this section. Slightly later, these doors were likely also early 20th century, maybe 1930s-ish. These incredible carved doors by Ariogun of Osi and then these were palace doors that likely graced the entry to the kingdom that he was from, Osi Ilorin. On each register, you'll see scenes portraying everyday life, kingship rituals, and the ruling dynasty. So these motifs were really drawn from modern life and infused in this artist's work is this dynamism of Yoruba culture that's happening in the 20th century as the colonial period progresses. So, we still see the importance of the horse. The horse remains, as you see here in the top left corner, an important sign of power and wealth and status that is still clearly being used in the arts in the 1930s. But at the same time, not going to, there we go. We start to see the influence of bicycles. So bicycles were introduced during the British colonial period, and these are similarly being read as potent indicators of status and prestige, as well as symbols of the Western world. So there's this, the ever-present trickster deity, Eshu, can be found 3 times on this door, but 2 of those 3 times you see him riding this marker of status and power, the bicycle. There are other motifs that are sort of drawn from modern life that reflect the changing visual culture of daily life in the colonial period. You'll recognize In the top right, we have British Colonial Native Authority police wearing their characteristic fezzes. And also, some think that this seated man next to the figure in the fez is wearing a pith helmet, and he's likely a British clerk who's receiving taxes in the square box that he's holding up in front of Eshu here. He could also be a colonial authority with a book or something that has to do with a legal code. Not entirely clear. And so what we've seen sort of in this progression that I really love is that you have sort of here you have the two coexisting. You have bikes, you have horses, you have these other markers of power, and then in this wonderful transformation that really brings together the first two examples, we have this veranda post by George Bondelay, who was actually the son of Ariogun. Bondelay was an incredibly prolific carver as well. And here we see what happens to the image of the seated writer. You know, we have transformed now from horses as status symbols of warriors of wealth during the 19th century, and the bicycle became this similar indicator of prestige and status. And so now, where you would see a horse and rider holding up a position of power in a building as a veranda post, as a colonial period progresses, you now see individuals riding bicycles wearing pith helmets. And I think he probably also had a pipe at one point, which is what this hole in the mouth would have been. And so here we see this wonderful architectural shift that has occurred as colonial era markers of status have become sort of absorbed into the palace culture. So that's our first case study. Our second case study, I want to turn to another veranda post. And this, I want to shout out Carly Forbes, our former curatorial fellow, who did an incredible amount of research on this post that is just some excellent scholarship. So in the first group of objects, we saw the impact of colonialism as local artists responded to the shifting visual markers of power in their work. In this example, I want to look at this piece, which is an excellent summary of colonial era trade in the arts. In its features, it isn't immediately apparent that there's been some impact of the colonial period on how this was originally carved, but the movement of this piece, even as a piece of architecture, this was not exempt from entering the art market. The way it moved really speaks to how the colonial period turned everything into a commodity. So the post scene here represents three primary figures. You'll see a mother holding a child upside down in her left hand. Beneath her, a female figure alongside the trickster deity Eshu again, who we've already seen before. He's playing his pipe. And then another figure as well. So based upon the configuration of these figures, the scholar Robert Ferris Thompson surmised that this post originally supported the roof of an Ogboni lodge. And the Ogboni, this is a society of titled elder Yoruba who worship the earth as a source of all laws, in which pre-colonial times, they were also the enforcers of those laws. And we don't know exactly when this post left Yoruba land, but it certainly had an interesting journey. And so let me see. Sorry, I just saw a question come in about the motorcycles. Are any of the two-wheelers motorcycles? So this was a question that came in, and I'm just going to bounce around and answer this very quickly in relation to the bicycles. Not that I've seen in the veranda post. So in asking, we see this go from horse and rider to bicycle and rider. Would it be that there is now a rider of power that is riding a motorcycle? I I haven't seen that in veranda posts, but I have seen that in masking traditions, that there is an incredible mask at the Fowler, and I actually cut that slide from the presentation showing an individual riding a motorcycle. And I think that there probably are some connections, but it doesn't have the same, I think it's sort of been diluted in terms of this clear sign of power from the direct connection between horse and bicycle. But thank you, Kathy, for your question. Returning to this piece, the piece here, there's some incredible archival data on this piece that gets at how it moved. And one thing that we'll notice is that there we go. Is that at least at one point in time, this post was on fire. And you can see that where the arrow is pointing, that there are burn marks on this. And such damage would have impacted the post's structural integrity, though I don't think that this really it didn't have a great loss in terms of the structural integrity here. But that could have caused its sale. We also know that in times of religious change, this could spur local communities to remove or burn material. There could have been something that happened that caused people to burn this intentionally as a way of deactivating it. And also Europeans, colonial activities frequently used fire as a weapon to subdue African communities and populations. It's hard to say what of these sort of three possible scenarios that, these are the three scenarios that come to mind first. These are not the only possible scenarios, but it's hard to say what caused this fire. But in any case, it is likely the cause of removal for the post. And so once it was removed, this was sold or taken and entered the art market. And we don't know how this happened, but it ended up in the 1920s in a pub in Bristol, England, a pub that was owned by a man by the name of Isaac Isles. And, someone who was looking to purchase African art happened upon this pub and came upon the post. And from our research, we have found that Isaac Isles, he traveled to the Congo, he traveled to Nigeria. So there's a possibility that during his life, he acquired this while in Nigeria. But more likely, this speaks to how, the extractive element of colonialism brought everything it could get its hands on back to the shores of the UK. And because Bristol is a port city, it seems more likely that Isles, having traveled to Africa, kept an eye out on the ports and was buying things off of sailors, off of returning administrators, off of any number of people, military personnel, for his collection. And so you see sort of the machine at work in this piece that is meant to hold up a building, being dissociated from its original context, its original function, and entering the European art market. It's really representative of just the tens, hundreds of thousands, millions of objects that left Africa as a result of military and civilian expeditions, and they lost their histories in the process. Because I never time things all that well, I will rush along to my final example, which thinks about doors again, but also about resistance. And this is my favorite example of a Nigerian architectural element in the Fowler's collection. As a little bit of background before I get you to our door. In 1924, the British government launched the British Empire Exhibition. This was essentially a world fair that was meant to promote trade within the British Empire. It was held outside of London, in Wembley. And the West African colonial pavilions for Nigeria, the Gold Coast, which is now Ghana, and Sierra Leone were located within one grand structure that you see on the screen now called to create a stronger connection with the colonies. The pavilion, quote unquote, transported visitors through design elements inspired by Northern Nigerian architecture, painted wall murals, and the display of Nigerian artists, creating work before the visitors' eyes. And so you can see a metal worker and his apprentice who were working at the British Empire exhibition here. This is a postcard that was made at the time. The exhibition organizers brought more than 20 men and women from Nigeria to Wembley, predominantly artists, but also spouses, who were forced to live in the walled city. The historical record shows some disagreement between the commissioners. Sorry. Between the commissioners of the Nigerian and Gold Coast pavilions as to whether the public should be allowed to visit the homes of the artists when they were visiting the walled city. The Gold Coast rules initially outlined that the public would not be permitted. But then the Nigerian Pavilion Commissioner, C.T. Lawrence, wrote, and you see this here on November 5th, 1923, stating, "I entirely disagree with the Gold Coast proposal that the public should not be allowed in the residential part of the village." It's not clear how the parties came to a resolution, but it resulted with the living quarters being accessible to the public. As you know, and the living quarters they were basically considered part of the exhibition. They were made part of the visual experience transporting British visitors to the colonies. And so you can see here, this is the area where all of the artists were forced to live, and they were really also not allowed to leave while they were there, except with express permission. So because they were trying to aestheticize all of this, the organizers had all of these homes that the artists were living in. They all had these elaborately carved doors on them. These were made from imported wood from Nigeria. And today we understand, of course, that to deny the artist's privacy from the public was an obvious and egregious transgression. But it took some time for the exhibition organizers to come to the same conclusion. Two small slips of paper, and this is why this is my favorite door in our collection. 2 small slips of paper affixed to the front of this door declare strictly private, no admittance in handwriting, and then strictly private room typed on the piece of paper below. When the West African artists arrived in England, many London periodicals ran these truly horrible, primitivizing, and offensive articles about them, and I honestly suggest you don't look them up. They are not worth looking at. And members of the Union of Students of African Descent, which was a largely apolitical organization, observed these articles and the abhorrent treatment of the artists, and it pushed them to act. And they basically, in a resolution, they protested the coverage and they beseeched the press to end their racist missives. And they also requested that journalists be blocked from the residential spaces of the African artists to assure their privacy and dignity. As a result of the outcry, and I believe they also got a little help from the prince, who had been touring the British Empire exhibition. The exhibition organizers barred journalists from photographing and pestering the artists, as they put it. But the ban was clearly not entirely effective, as evidenced by the notices on the doors. The artists had to take measures themselves to expel any journalists and photographers who trespassed on their workshops and living spaces. So I think the thing I really love about these pieces of paper is that these are these subtle indications of people asserting their dignity. And so it's so hard to see traces of these kinds of actions and movements in the arts like this. But to think about, a beautifully carved door that is meant to promote a primitivizing perspective on African life during the colonial period and have it to this day exist as a testament to the way that community members spoke up and pushed back and sought to assert dignity and agency is a wonderful trace to remain on these doors that we can share with our visitors. And so it's in these examples that we can see the way that colonization, from the introduction of new technologies to the extractive and exploitative nature of the colonial enterprise, to the agency or lack thereof of African artists and peoples, are really written into the pieces in the Fowler's collection. And these are histories that it's important to keep telling, and I hope you come by and see these pieces in the gallery. And yeah, thank you so much. I think I have like 5 minutes for questions if there are any questions.
Erica,
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing your insight and expertise and for sharing more about our collection on display in the Fowler's permanent exhibition, Intersections, World Arts, Local Lives. To our audience, if you enjoyed today's Lunch and Learn and curious to learn and see more, please come visit us at the Fowler and consider joining and becoming a Fowler member. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter and follow us on social media to stay up to date with upcoming exhibitions and programs. Today's program has been recorded and will be uploaded to the Fowler website for you to revisit and share in a few weeks. Have a wonderful weekend, and we hope to see you at one of our upcoming spring programs. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Erica.
Thank you.